Thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the virtual launch of Blood Trail by Tony Park. I'm Don Pinnock. I'm a historian, criminologist, journalist with Daily Maverick. And people are popping in from all over the world. So isn't Zoom wonderful? That's the only thing we got that was positive out of COVID. Now, as part of housekeeping before we begin, you won't be able to hear, we won't be able to hear you, but you can post questions on the chat function on Zoom. Tony and I will chat for about 20 to 25 minutes, I guess, and then we'll take some Q&As from the audience, from you. So please send your questions using the Q&A button. The books are available from virtual and physical bookstores. You can get them on the ebook on Amazon. You can get it on Kobo. Now, Macmillan will post links in the chat, and you'll also get an email tomorrow, I think, with a link, a recording of this recording, with all the details of how you can buy a copy. You can also win a copy of the book by answering a poll question. Pan Macmillan is giving away 2 copies, and we'll announce the winner at the end. Now, that's the homework stuff. It's fair to say that Tony Park doesn't need an introduction. I mean, if he did, most likely he wouldn't be here today. But you probably know he grew up in Sydney and spends half his life in South Africa or Africa. You probably know from his writing that he's a journalist as well, because he's a damn fine writer. And from reading his books, you probably guessed he has military experience. He, in fact, has. He served in Afghanistan and finished up there as a major. Another factoid, which you probably don't know, is Tony and his wife, Nicola, own a safari lodge in Zimbabwe called Nantwich Lodge. So now you can go there, all right? Blood Trail, I think, is Tony's. Is that a question, a trick question? Wait, it's. I'm not going to tell you how many. I'm not going to tell you how many novels he's published. Keep that in mind. But he's used lockdown to write 2 more novels and 3 biographies, which should be finished by the end of the year. So I find that level of production a little scary. I mean, do you have doppelgangers? Don't answer this, Tony. As a writer, I don't know how you write that much. So, Tony, let me end this sort of my no need for introduction by congratulating you. Blood Trail has just hit the #1 sales in South Africa. It certainly deserves to, and fantastic. Well done. Now, Blood Trail it's a story in its own right, but it's a continuation of the theme on rhino poaching. And we meet many of the same characters, the conflicted characters, wonderfully conflicted characters from your previous books. Now, I think we should talk about poaching in a moment. But first, Tony, as an Australian, what's Africa mean to you? Why here? You keep coming back. Why are so many of your novels based here?
Yeah, thanks, Don. Thanks for the intro. It's good to see you again, and thanks to Pan Macmillan for bringing us together here, and thanks to people joining from all over the place. Nice to see we've got quite a few people here today. What is it about Africa? It's such a good question, Don, and it's one that I have been asked a number of times over the years, and it's one that I always try and come up with an answer. Sometimes I come up with a throwaway answer, but I think on so many levels, number one, it has become my home, my other home, is, as you mentioned in your intro. My wife Nicola and I do spend half the time in Australia and half the year normally in Africa, particularly Southern Africa, and in particular South Africa. And we've just got out of Australia last week to get back to our home in South Africa. And of course, we feel very lucky to be able to live this life and lucky to be back here. I think as a visitor, my wife and I came here on what was supposed to be a once in a lifetime safari in '95, and something happened to us that I have seen a malaise that's happened to a number of foreigners, people that are not from Africa's shores. Something about this place hooks you, and I think greater than anywhere else I've traveled. And my wife and I have traveled around quite a bit of the rest of the world for work and pleasure. And I think it's a combination of things. certainly we were initially bowled over by the continent's wildlife, and that's why we came, why a lot of foreigners come here, I think, for a typical safari holiday. But very quickly we worked out that the real attraction, the real lure, the real charm, if you like, of this continent is its people, of so many different cultures and ways of life and things, and that the more we traveled, the more welcoming, friendly, fascinating people we came across. And of course, the natural landscape, the beauties of the natural landscape, which you've written about over many years, that not just the wildlife, but the whole environment. And that's something we've become more interested in, and I've kind of dealt with in some of my previous books, not just megafauna and animals, but plants. So my long-winded answer is coming back to a short answer is that we were hooked, I think, by Africa, and we were hooked at a time when I was starting to get serious about pursuing the one thing in life I wanted to do, which was write. So why Africa? Because I think as a writer, I found everything I needed here. I found a place that moved me, a place that enthralled and interested me, and that could be one of the many different countries or areas that I write about. And I found that most elusive but most essential of all things that a writer needs and that's inspiration. And that's inspiration in the form of endless material and ideas for novels that would keep me going for the rest of my life. And inspiration also, I think importantly, that other meaning to the word, I am inspired. I am continually uplifted by my time living here in South Africa and the rest of Africa. And I know that sometimes raises a few eyebrows because we could and may go into some of the problems that face the environment and the country, but I am continually astounded by the good that I see in this country and this continent and the way people come together. So yeah, the short answer is hooked. And I write about Africa because I'm inspired by Africa.
Well, we in Africa are happy about that. But one of the things you found is poaching. I'm an environmental journalist. I write a lot about poaching, but I must say I learn more about it from your books, which are fiction, than from most of the informants. And I think that's because you get inside the characters, which general news doesn't. You get inside the characters who do the poaching and also the characters who fight to stop it. Can you talk about the impact and the state of rhino poaching and how you build such believable characters? You must know them intimately to do that. Are you a poacher, Tony?
Yeah, gamekeeper, poacher turned gamekeeper. It's interesting, Don. You raise a really good point. I mean, when I write a book, and I do have some characters, as you mentioned, that come back. I have a police captain, Sannie van Rensburg, who reappears in this book. So she's got a bit of backstory and a bit of history, but she's moved into a real life role as the head of the Stock Theft and Endangered Species Unit, which is the police unit within the Kruger Park that covers rhino poaching. Now, for me to make her a believable character, of course I have to research, but for me, research is something that I have learned over the course of the novels I've done is best not done by just searching the internet or even reading lots of books, but it's about finding real people. So within my fictitious characters through all my novels, while the characters are not based on real people, they do have real life experiences. And so the work that they do, I think their attitude to life, their ups and their downs have very much come through in stories that I've heard from people like yourself. I have worked as a journalist, and you know, one of the challenges of a journalist, one of the skills you need is to interview people and to try and bring out their innermost thoughts and feelings and then put those into words. So I rely very heavily on the people that I met. Have I met a poacher? Well, kind of. I had a friend who worked in the National Park Service many years ago who was, I would think of you know, you get a range of people working in any job, and some people are there because they're there to earn a pay packet, and they may enjoy their job one day or may not. Some people are in their job because they're passionate, and this guy was a National Parks guide actually, and he was I would have to say, one of the most passionate people I had ever met in terms of his love and excitement in getting out into the bush and seeing wildlife. And unfortunately, a few years after I met him, to my great shock and surprise, he was arrested for rhino poaching in Kruger Park. And that got me thinking very early on in my writing career, if you're going to write about poachers, they're the baddies. Okay, that's something I believe. I don't believe, I can't find a justification, but I'm interested in the why. Why would someone like that turn to poaching? And as with this book, and I won't talk about who the baddies are in this book, obviously, or why they turn to poaching. But if I look at my last book, Last Survivor, was about cycad smuggling, and the poachers there tend to be middle class to affluent suburban people who illegally buy and sell endangered plants to put in their gardens. They do not fit the stereotypical image that someone might have, say, of a rhino poacher, who could be someone from a poverty-stricken community in Mozambique or on the edge of the Kruger Park who's doing it for money, or they could be an organized criminal. These are, what dare I say, ordinary suburban middle-class people. What does it all come down to? It comes down to money. Why did my friend turn to poaching? Because rhino horn, as you know, and many people watching would know, is worth more than gold, diamonds, and cocaine. So money becomes a motivator for people from any walk of life. Anybody can be corrupted. And so that's what I try to look for, the human element in characters. Why do people do what they do? Why do people, this is something that continues to inspire me, particularly as someone who lives part of my time in Australia, where we like, particularly in my country, we like to pontificate a bit about the environment. And we expect our elected representatives to enact legislation to protect endangered species. And we write letters to our politicians and we sign petitions, and all those are good things. Yet here in Africa, to be conservation minded, to be someone who cares about wildlife, can mean putting on a uniform and picking up a gun and going into the bush where you'll face the threat of wild animals, from lions and leopards and charging buffaloes and elephants, putting your life on the line to then potentially go into armed combat with poachers. That takes a special sort of person, and the person fighting a war of attrition. When we look at the war against rhino poaching, a war where more often than not, they're seeing negative press about the impact of poaching and perhaps not enough recognition of the good work being done. So when you put all those into characters, you're going to come up with some pretty conflicted, as you say, and complex characters who go to work knowing they're putting their life on the line. Whether they're a poacher or an anti-poaching ranger, they're still putting their life on the line to achieve their mission, to either poach a rhino or to take a rhino. That creates what's known as a high risk, high reward environment, and that's good stuff to write about. So that's how I kind of get into the heads of the characters, and wherever possible, I talk to real people and work their real experiences into the book. And that's how I learn about things like rhino poaching and other wildlife and environment crimes. So, and I guess it's very much the same for you. I guess in a novel, though, you have perhaps you got more space to play with, a broader canvas. And I think one thing I'd just like to say is I also have to be very careful not to use my novels as a soapbox. I like to raise awareness of things like poaching, but I have my own views on conservation and the environment. I have to be very careful not to be using my novels as a means of pushing my particular views on particular subjects.
You do that so well. Because I'm quite passionate about it myself, it's so easy to soapbox. But you raised something about middle-class people and who's doing this and who's fighting this. And this has always been an issue for me. One of the tragedies of poaching and the poaching epidemic, you get people like Dawie Groenewald, and I'll mention his name publicly. I mean, he's up on 1,400 charges for poaching and illegal sale of rhino horns, and he's out on bail. And for 10 years he's never been arrested. And the people who are getting shot and getting caught are very often just kids or young people who are looking for money. And on the other side, there's I talked to a chief warden's wife just the other day about her husband's job, and he said, she said he joined because of his love of nature, and now he's fighting a war. He never expected that. So can you talk a bit about the economy and the kind of social context of poaching and what it's doing to societies that you actually depict so well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now, Don?
Sorry, did my question fall out? I can't hear you. I think you missed.
How's that?
Put on, yeah, okay.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, no.
Where did you drop out? At what point, Tony?
Yeah, no, I think I caught the end of your question there about the types of poaching and the impact on communities and things like that. That was the gist of your question. Yeah. Look, I think it's very interesting because I think it sort of leads into Blood Trail when you look at what was happening during the lockdown and the extra level of pressures that people were put onto. When I was first researching Blood Trail, one of the things I discovered was that things had changed a little bit in the kind of the poaching side of things in the fraternity. I think what's probably underestimated is the amount of good work that's done behind the scenes in stopping poaching incidents, how much progress the South African National Parks have made in the anti-poaching ranges through the things such as employing new technology and in particular dogs, which I've written about before, how that has achieved really good results in the past. But these results are often unseen because they're about stopping the many attacks, many attempted rhino poaching incidents that never come to fruition. So in effect, you don't see the good work that's being done behind the scenes. But one thing that I did pick up from a couple of the communities, or one particular community in particular on the edge of the Kruger Park, was that poachers are having a harder time. It is more difficult for them to get through to get a rhino. More of them are stopped than get through. Many more are stopped than get through. You mentioned about kids going into the park. That's something that I've picked up in my research in the area where I live on the edge of the park in the southern region, is that quite often the poaching gangs will recruit youngsters, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, give them a gun, send them over the fence into the Sabi Sands or the Kruger almost like cannon fodder. And what's happened, according to one source of mine, was that those criminals who perhaps further up the chain, who might have been commissioning or organising those poaching attacks, are turning to other sorts of crimes, such as kidnapping and extortion and armed robbery. And so poaching is not as easy as it has been. And so that then shifts the crime problem into another part of society. So I kind of highlighted that a little bit in Blood Trail in a subplot with a couple of kids who are indeed taken. And that came off a real life thing. So, yeah, I think, the other thing I found through talking to people involved in poaching is that it is a very complex issue. But the poaching gangs, we do think of the poacher as the person, we often think of the person at the bottom of the chain, who probably does come from an impoverished community. But as you mentioned, you've got people higher up the chain from all walks of life. And the other thing that comes across is when the authorities get good at combating poaching in a particular area, for example, the increased use of tracker dogs in and around the Kruger Park, it will just shift the problem to another community and you'll find a spike happening elsewhere in South Africa or elsewhere in Southern Africa. So the people charged with combating poaching have to be able to, one, be able to shift their resources and change their resources, and two, willing to do that, and I guess politically able to do that. One of the big frustrations, of course, in the South African side of, say, the Kruger Park, is that a lot of poaching has come from Mozambique in the past, and to stop that requires high-level diplomacy as opposed to kind of boots on the ground.
Of course, the other thing is that the poachers are running out of, rhinos. The rhino numbers in the Kruger Park have dropped from 10 years ago of 10 thousand to 3,500 now. So they, the poachers are running out of rhinos. Although Kruger Park crows that rhino poaching has gone down, there's not the right reasons for it. But just to shift into somewhere else, you in Blood Trail and several of your books are based on the Sabi Sand area. And that's the unfenced private holdings on the western border of Kruger. Is there any particular reason at Sabi Sand you favor Sabi Sand, because you do it very well?
Yeah, again, you talked about bringing back previous characters. I can bring back previous locations. I have a fictitious but typical private lodge in the Sabi Sands Reserve that I've featured out of convenience for in a couple of my books. Sometimes I use real places in my books, and I do that because I think I'll give them a bit of publicity, and I've had a good time, or they enjoyed it. If you have too much shoot 'em up and things like that, then real life lodges don't particularly want to have their names used. So I have my fictitious Lion Plains Game Reserve, which is an amalgam of a couple. So one, it's convenient. The other thing what I have done in previous books is I've kind of used my writing as an excuse to travel, and so I've set books in countries such as Namibia or Zimbabwe, or even as far afield as Rwanda and Tanzania, because I happen to be traveling there, or because I want to go traveling there. Blood Trail was written in the spare bedroom of my 2-bedroom flat in Sydney during lockdown last year when I was stuck in Australia. So I was kind of starved a little bit in terms of inspiration and creative juices in not being able to go on a long trip somewhere and write about where I was. So I thought I had to write about somewhere that I knew. And this is my home. Where my house is on the edge of the Kruger Park is just south of the Sabi Sands. And so the Sabi Sand Game Reserve is across the road from where I am now. It's about 600 metres that way. So it's an area I know very well, and also the communities on the border of the Sabi Sand, where a number of my friends live. And so I had to just write somewhere familiar. Basically, that's the answer why the Sabi Sands features in Blood Trail. So, and look, it was a good thing too, because I think what it did was knowing that I could write about the locations just from memory. Meant that I could maybe spend a bit more time on the innermost feelings and thoughts and beliefs and emotions of the characters, and that's what I really tried to hone in on Blood Trail. Yes, the landscape's there. Yes, we have elephants and lions and game drive vehicles and luxury lodges, but I think that's all from memory. This is more about, for me, the challenge, and I guess the reward of Blood Trail was about exploring those innermost feelings and thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Blood Trail must be one of the first thrillers that has taken in the impact of COVID and lockdowns on the way in which the story is put together. But on another matter, South Africa is a very racially complex society, yet in Blood Trail, as in your other books, you have a very sharp antennae about how this influences how characters react, probably better than most South Africans. Has being an outsider made it easier to navigate these nuances? Because you do it so well.
Well, look, thanks, Don. I think, yeah, I think it possibly does help being an outsider. I think I can get away with a lot of stuff. I hope I don't put my foot in it so much, but I come to wanting to understand the various cultures and backgrounds of the people that I know, whether they're someone from an Afrikaans background or an English-speaking South African background, or they're a Zulu, or near where I live, if they're a Shangaan person and their mother tongue is Xisonga. People's cultures are all different, and I think because I am an outsider, it's probably not. It may be easy for me to say, hey, what do you believe in, and what's your background, and what do you think of this, and what do you think of that, because maybe they're a little bit disarmed by me, and that kind of happened when I was researching Blood Trail. I was stuck in Australia. I thought, how am I going to research a book about traditional beliefs? So I rang one of my friends who lives in one of the communities. He actually works on the estate where I have a house here. And I just started firing all these questions at him about his traditional beliefs and had he ever visited a Sangoma? And did he believe in a Muti? And he said, yes, he did, but he was a Christian also. And that conversation might have been a little bit more difficult for one of his other white South African neighbours or friends to just bowl up and ask him. But I'm the kind of the unusual Aussie, whatever. I can get away with being maybe a little bit nosy and curious and, oh, sorry if I've offended you. I always say that. I don't want to offend you, but, So, yeah, I think a bit of naivety probably helps. And I think that thing that we journos have, that ability to ask the questions happens. And look, I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, Don, but I am fascinated by this country. I am fascinated by the history, by the politics, by the different cultures, by the similarities and the differences. And yeah, maybe I do have that, still have a bit of that naive tourist about me where I can sort of get away with asking some of those questions up front and maybe not be stopped by any baggage that I have, or maybe worrying that I'm going to be upsetting someone. Because I do find, one thing I found as a journo is as much as people will say, I don't want to talk about myself or what I do, at the end of the day, most of us do want to share a little bit of it ourselves and talk about what excites us and what motivates us. And sometimes you need an outsider to draw that out of you, whether it be from another country or whether it just be an author or a journalist probing for that extra info. But I do it shamelessly because I like it and because I love learning more and more about this place that I choose to call home.
Well, in the character of Virtuous in Blood Trail, you have a Sangoma and you really get inside what she's trying to do. She's a great character. She has this deep wisdom. I was wondering if growing up surrounded by Aborigine culture and magic, that might have helped you have an ear for that kind of character. But just to move on. Okay, you can answer that.
No, I was just going to say I grew up in a very suburban background, a very kind of not connected to wildlife or the bush or anything. So I came to a lot of this later in life. So I'd like to say I did, but one thing I will say is I actually struck it lucky in that one of the editors at Macmillan is actually a practicing Sangoma, and she was very kindly and kind enough to read the manuscript for me and provide some really valuable feedback for me. So again, I do fall back on experts for quite a lot of this.
Yeah. You also have really strong female characters. There's Mia in The Game Guard and Sannie van Rensburg, the policewoman in Blood Trail. Also you have Tumi, the dog handler, Christine, the dog breeder in Scent of Fear, and others.
Yep.
Really fully developed, believable characters. Does your wife, Nicola, think you're good at understanding how women tick? Is she listening?
That's a good question. I don't know if she's listening or not. That's a good question. It's interesting. People are interested in writing. They say one of the truisms of writing is, read a lot, write a lot, and write what you like. So I've always read quite a lot, and one of the authors I liked reading was Ken Follett, the British author, and he wrote these cracking, often historical thrillers, and would usually have a fairly strong female character in there. And I kind of like that. I gravitated towards books with strong female character. I'm a big fan of people like Margie Orford, has strong female characters in her books. And I think when it comes to putting people in situations and unusual situations, quite often I've done this in many of my books. You have a leading man and a leading lady, and they may or may not get together. But the interesting thing is, it's kind of based on one of your earlier questions, is when it came to writing Blood Trail, overwhelmingly, the people I was electronically bumping into who were experts in this area were women. A senior police officer who helped me, an academic who first gave me the idea for this story about poachers and rangers using muti and, relying on spells to protect themselves and help their efforts in the bush. And so I had those strong female input coming in. And Mia, the safari guide, as you mentioned, there are two leading ladies in the book. There's Sunny and Mia, and that's about it, really. Mia's based on her adventures are based on a couple of real life female safari guides who I've come across. One, Taylor, who was working as a presenter on the Wild Earth Safari Live program, the very popular internet broadcast game drives that kept people like me going last year when we couldn't get into the bush in South Africa. We watched our live to air game drives, and Taylor McCurdy, one of the presenters, helped me with the research. I have another friend, Margot May, who is literally one of South Africa's top field guides. She was either field guide of the year or first runner-up a couple of years ago. And so I drew on their experiences, which helped me in the research. To get female characters right, I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing about the publishing industry, Don. It's certainly here and in Australia, it's an industry in which women have made fantastic inroads right to the very tops of the books, to the tops of the industry. And when I write a book, my wife is the first person who reads it. My mum is the next person. My mother-in-law is the next person, and they both help with corrections. My publisher then reads it, who's a female. She passes it on to my editor, who is a female, who passes it on to the copy editor, who is a female, who passes it on to the proofreader, who is a female. I think the first guy that reads this book is my former South African Defence Force weapons expert, who's probably the only man that reads it before it gets published. So, Don, I get plenty of frank feedback about my female characters before they go to print. So I have to give credit where credit is.
It sounds as though you do. But talking about characters, one of my favorite of your characters is not a human, it's Benny, the dog, the tracker dog.
Yes.
He's such in one of your books, he even starts the book. I mean, it's him talking.
Yeah.
You have got inside dogs and tracker dogs. How did you develop your knowledge about tracker dogs, which you do so well? They're such extraordinary characters.
Yeah. Well, who doesn't love a dog? Even the cat people will generally like a dog as well, even if they won't admit it. They say when I was writing that first book that featured Benny Centifere, and for people who like Benny, he is back in Blood Trail, and I went about it the same way as other books, in that I spoke to some very helpful people who were doing anti-poaching canine work in the Sabi Sands. But before that, a few years ago, I wrote another book called War Dogs, which is one of the 7 non-fiction biographies that I've written, and that was about an Australian guy serving in Afghanistan, and he was a contract dog handler there, where he had an explosive detection dog, which is how Benny started life before he ended up doing anti-poaching work. He also worked as a dog in Afghanistan. Interestingly enough, as I found out when writing War Dogs, is because of geography and international distances and quarantine and things like that, a lot of the working dogs employed in Afghanistan during the war there by non-military handlers, by civilian agencies and things, were bred in South Africa. So South Africa is a bit of a powerhouse, as it turns out, for the international working dog market. So I learned quite a bit about working dogs in writing that book, War Dogs, with a friend of mine, Shane Bryant, which has just been re-released last year online. And so I started to learn about dogs. And indeed, I saw for myself in Afghanistan just how incredible their abilities to detect explosives were. Sometimes I saw a dog who uncovered an old bomb from the Russian war years back in the 80s that was buried about 10 feet under a road, and he could still pick up the scent of explosives about 2.5 meters underground. And so they became fascinating. What I learned through real life and research was that dogs were becoming a real game changer, certainly in the Kruger Park and in the Sabi Sands. Again, just proving very successful as a deterrent, even if that means moving the poaching problem to somewhere else. So then I thought it's also fun to explore the fun-loving nature of a dog, because kind of to get back to the point of your question, one thing I learned about working dogs is whether they're in a military role or even an anti-poaching role where they face danger. Certainly they've lost dogs in Afghanistan to IEDs and enemy fire, and in the Sabi Sands and the Kruger, I just heard the other day about a dog that was wounded by a leopard. So they face that additional risk of working in a very dangerous environment. Yet one thing that you continually see, I think you can see it in the dogs, and you hear from the handlers, is that they love their work. They are they are active, they are engaged on a daily basis. And I'm sure, I don't have a dog because of my lifestyle, but those I have had in the past, you always want to be able to take your dog for a walk and keep it enriched and exercised. And it can be difficult for a pet, but these working dogs are just out there every day, having fun, doing what they want to do, and saving lives in the process. So I thought, what a great backstory for a hero. And so, yeah, Benny's one of my favorite heroes.
Yeah, my too. Well, I mean, I share a house with a Tafuran, which is a long-haired Malinois. And this thing's intelligence, the intelligence is scary. She really keeps us on our toes. But just shifting to another space, you have a very good knowledge of surveillance systems and weapons. In Blood Trail, the electronic tracking of poachers is spectacular. Is that real, or did you invent it?
Yeah, look, it is real. I had to kind of muddy a few details. But coming from a military background, you don't want to give the game away. I used to work in Army public relations. We had to be very careful that you don't give out too much information that maybe benefits the enemy. But I was lucky enough to volunteer for a couple of shifts on the South African National Park's meerkat system. Now that's out there. There is information about the meerkat on YouTube and online, and Sam Parks have released a certain amount of information on it. Suffice it to say that it is a very sophisticated monitoring system using an array of technology and gadgetry to detect poachers coming and going. And the success rates of that system, where it has been employed, are absolutely phenomenal. And it kind of goes to what I was talking about before, where I hope I get the figure right, but it's either 95 or 99% of incursions are stopped. That is, a poacher is either detected and is sent packing, sent running away, or they're arrested, or maybe they get involved in a gunfight. And it's that very few that get through that do cause the poaching attacks. The other thing I noticed working on the meerkat, and I will say I do certainly take your point about the reduction in numbers in rhinos, but I think it's also fairly well known that what Sam Parks has done is as has been done in other countries such as Zimbabwe, is looked at intensive protection zones where a lot of the rhinos have been either forcibly or naturally kind of congregated, and that could be through circumstances as well too. So working on that system is incredibly inspirational and fun, because you're not only detecting people, but you're actually seeing where the rhinos are, and there are a lot of rhinos out there in the bush. I won't say where they are. So yeah, a lot of that's real. A lot of that technology is real. A lot of that technology comes from the military, and a lot of that comes from advances made during the war in Afghanistan, where technology certainly improved. I saw in the time of my life in the Army, the ability to detect went from fairly primitive versions of that shot spotter type system where you can triangulate the sound of a bullet going off, down to being able to detect individual humans quite a distance off, and being able to use things like artificial intelligence to differentiate between humans and animals when you detect things moving. So a lot of that gadgetry in Blood Trail is based on real life, and it's good to see it being used.
Mm. Okay, just to the actual process of books and novels, two questions. I think they're sort of linked. Pardon me, I don't know why I'm running out of liquid. Who's reading your books, Tony? And also, if you could just add, how do you go about writing a book? You write, more than a book a year. It's an extraordinary process. But first of all, who's reading your books? Do you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I started writing, I thought I was probably writing books for people like me, middle-aged white guys. But interestingly enough, I soon found out that probably more women than men read my books. And something I'm really, I guess I will say, proud to say, is that judging by the feedback I get through social media and emails, my readership, particularly here in South Africa, has become a lot more diverse. I think it's more truly representative of the cultures of South Africa, and I get really good feedback, and I learn a lot from my readers from a range of South Africa's many different cultures and backgrounds. So that's really good. I must say thank you to all my readers from South Africa who joined in today to watch. Thank you for wherever you're coming from. But I've not only been made to feel welcome in South Africa on a personal basis, but as I think you mentioned, you know, Blood Trial went to #1. I'm just thrilled and amazed and appreciative and thankful for all the people in South Africa who have kind of embraced my books, as well as my wife and I. So yeah, it's an interesting snapshot of who's writing. How do I write? I worked out pretty early on through trial and error that what worked for me when writing fiction was just to make it up as I go along. I like to get enthused and excited when I'm writing a novel, and I don't want to know what happens next. So the traditional school of thought in writing a novel is that you have a plot, a plan, a blueprint, the beginning, the middle, and the end before you start writing. You know who the characters are, and you fill in the blanks. I tried that with the first unsuccessful novel that I wrote. And then the first novel I wrote set in Africa was my first novel to be published, a book called Far Horizon. And I wrote that on a tour around Southern Africa. My wife and I were touring around, and I set it on a fictitious overland tour. And I found that just starting each day, not knowing where my fictitious bunch of tourists were going to end up next, because I didn't know where I was going to end up next, and just writing about the sights and the sounds and the people that I met as I went along worked for me. So I write a novel by just making it up as I go along. I'm writing another novel at the moment, which is due for release next year. I've nearly finished it. I'm actually working on 3 biographies at the moment. The secret to that is 12, 13 hours days, I'm afraid to say. I find that I couldn't write fiction 12 hours a day. I couldn't. You know, it requires too much time and thought just to think up the characters and what's going to happen next. But a non-fiction book, I've interviewed someone, I generally write biographies, and then it's a matter of just knuckling down and working and getting their story down on paper.
Yeah. I want to go to questions. There's quite a few questions, but just briefly before I do that, you've rebuilt an abandoned lodge in Zimbabwe. What was that about?
Yeah, thanks. So Nantwich Lodge was our look. It's a passion project, I think. Nantwich is an old national parks camp in Wangi National Park, and it was a place where I set a couple of my earlier books, Safari and African Sky and African Dawn. It was a lovely little camp, just 3 2-bedroom chalets overlooking a dam with another larger house down by the dam. And unfortunately, due to the economy and the lack of tourism over the years, it became mothballed, then abandoned, and then eventually largely burned down. And so some friends of my wife and I and a business partner in South Africa, Hideaways Travel, we got together and raised the money to get a lease on that camp and rebuild it as a safari lodge. I was going to say a luxury safari lodge. It is. It's beautiful and luxurious, but we thought we were just headed for disaster, like some of the characters in Blood Trail in the tourism industry when the pandemic hit. And we have taken a big hit. But the whole experience has taught us a couple of things. Our staff are so important to us that we have kept them on and paid to keep them going, because they're going to be our greatest asset to rebuild with. And the other thing is that we probably, like a lot of lodges, had our eye on the international market, and we were doing our business plans and looking at funding the reconstruction of this lodge. And COVID has taught us the absolute fundamental importance of the local market. So we have basically been just kept afloat over the last year by looking after our Zimbabwean and Southern African clients and putting on deals for them. So it's been a good learning curve, I think, for us in the travel business. So it's certainly not a good time to be in the travel business, but it's been an interesting one.
But any poachers in that area are going to be in trouble, clearly. We're going to get into questions and answers. I'm going to start with Sandy, who says that has there been a positive effect from COVID that's helped you in your writing? And she also says, what part of Sabi Sands Game Reserve do you live in? Well, you don't live in it, but you live near it.
Yeah.
And remember,
Sandy, thanks for your question.
Sorry, just to tell people, your questions can, right at the bottom, you'll see Q&A. You can pop them in there and we'll try and get through as many as we can. Tony.
Good. I'll try and keep my answers short. Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, I think the most positive thing for me about COVID was not only for writing, but in my personal life. I found lockdowns forced me to reach out and, well, not forced me, but reminded me to reach out and reconnect with people, maybe even people that I hadn't or couldn't see for some reason. But thanks to things like, as Don said, Zoom's probably the only positive thing to come out of COVID. But I was able to reach out and contact my friend who works here and ask him about his traditional beliefs. And I wouldn't have called him otherwise, from Australia. I wouldn't have seen him for 3 months. I would have waited till I come back to South Africa. So the forced reconnection, the reminder to reconnect has been important for me. And my wife and I have a house in Little Reserve called Sabi Park, which once was part of the Sabi Sands, but got cut off in the late 1970s when a road was put through to the Paul Kruger Gate. So we are kind of across the road from the Sabi Sand Reserve. Our nearest neighbours are some of those lovely safari lodges over there. But it's an interesting area. We're on the edge of the Kruger Park.
Great, yeah. You've partly answered this, but there's a question from Nisha Patel. She says, how do you come up with the names and scenarios in your books? You've partly answered that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, scenarios can come up from anything, from a conversation around a campfire or someone I've met, or even something in the news. I wrote a book about illegal gold mining called The Prey a few years ago, and that was sparked by an article I read in one of the South African newspapers. Names for places are kind of amalgams. Names for people, most of the names in Blood Trail, apart from Sannie van Rensburg, who's an older character, are the names of real life people, and they are invariably real life people who have paid money at one of the various charities that I support, and often they pay money at auction. If it's the same Sandy that I'm thinking of who might have asked that last question, she was a very feisty character in Last Survivor, because she paid money to a charity that supports the painted dog, or African wild dog, based in Australia. So good people pay money to have their names used as characters, and Mia Greenaway, the lead character, paid money to the Painted Dog charity. And Bongani Ungubeni is a real person who works for a great project called the Nourish non-for-profit organisation at Hoedspruit, which is a community sustainability program in the community of Acorn Hook. And Bongani's name was purchased for him to be in the book by one of the supporters of the Nourish NPO. I'd just like to acknowledge the great work they're doing, which is about making communities more sustainable, giving them a source of income, which again will hopefully flow through to greater protection and appreciation of local wildlife. So some good people have their names in my books. That's where they come from.
Do you buy names of people? That's interesting.
Yeah, they pay. So they pay either to have their name used, or quite often a loved one's name or a friend's name used, and they pay the money to the charity. I say to them, you can't choose whether you're going to be a goodie or a baddie. That'll be up to me. But people get a kick out of it, yeah.
So you could pay good money to be a bad character.
Absolutely.
Michelle Cairns, let me see if I can interpret this properly. She says, good to see you chatting in Africa. Do you have an idea for a new crime fiction? Are you already in the plotting or writing stages? Do I hear right that Sonia Kurtz and her daughter are going to make an appearance?
Yes. I may have let that slip on social media. Yeah, I'm nearly finished my next novel for next year. And I mentioned this to you, Don, in an email recently. I can probably say now it's going to touch on the problem of abalone. I say abalone for the Australian audience and abalone for the South African audience, abalone poaching, and how that flows into other criminal pursuits in Africa. And Sonia Kurtz, one of my recurring characters, my female semi-retired mercenary, will be coming back, yes, indeed, along with her daughter. So that was an interesting one for me to start writing, at least in lockdown as well. So as to what happens next, as soon as I finish that next month, I'm going to start another novel, and I have no idea what that will be.
That's amazing. Have you, Yasmita Padiachi says, any thoughts for similar style books for younger audiences?
Wow, what a great question. Yeah. Look, I've had a few people say to me, maybe I should try and write for a younger audience, like tap into maybe the young adult market. And I have been thinking about it really, really seriously. My books are a bit, they're a bit growing up, a bit of romance, as we say, in them. And I don't know if it would be enough just for me to change some of the content. I don't have kids of my own, but I was a voracious reader as a teenager, and I thought if I could tap into young me, what would I like to read? So yeah, look, it is definitely on my radar, absolutely. And if anyone's got any feedback or any thoughts about that, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe I'll put a little poll on social media. Yeah, because it's I think it's fantastic that the young adult fiction market is so big. It's booming. It's often topping the charts. And hey, as a professional writer, if I could tap into that, I'd like it. But I'd also like to do it as just another means of encouraging people to read. If I was a teenager, I wouldn't want to read a fantasy book or science fiction or vampires and that kind of supernatural stuff. I would probably want to read the sort of books that I'm writing. So maybe there's some other kids out there in the junior honorary rangers or someone like that who would like to read my books. It's definitely something I'm thinking about.
Sandy Highland says, are any of your books heading for the big screen? Or should they be?
Hello, Sandy Highland. Oh, Blood Trail is all about beliefs, which some people will say superstitions, but you have to be respectful of people's beliefs. I will say, Touchwood. Maybe there has been some interest, but I don't want to talk too much about it in case I jinx it. So how's that for superstition and stuff? I'm hopeful. I don't know if I should be cautiously optimistic, but I'm hopeful that someone might have something to say sooner rather than later. Let's just say there's an awful lot of TV being made these days in the COVID era.
Well, Yasmita, with support from Nisha Patel, says you need a South African Indian representative, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, in your books.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's actually a friend of mine, Kubashni, who gets a mention in Blood Trail as well too. But yeah, thank you very much, because like I was saying before, I'm finding my readership is becoming more truly representative of this country. And I've only done one book set in KZN, that was Red Earth. But I want to explore more of South Africa. And yes, take in that rich Indian culture as well too, and many other cultures. Like I've never been to the Eastern Cape. I'd like to really get down there and explore some of the issues and cultures and people down there. So yeah, definitely on the horizon also. Absolutely, absolutely.
Marion van Lochenberg, he wants to know your favorite part of the fiction writing process and which part do you find most challenging?
Oh, what a great question. You're going to tap right into the innermost me, the innermost me. I'm going to lay it all bare. I love starting. Because all I need is an idea. Blood Trail, a poacher buys a potion that makes him disappear, and he really does disappear. How could that happen? Could it happen? So I was really excited when I finally got around to starting this book. Then I get to the middle. This happens in every single book I've written. I get to the middle and I freak out, because I think I'm not going to have enough to finish this book, and this idea was no good, and I should have started writing something else. But I know after 19 novels and 7 biographies, I have to just trust the process. The part of not having a plan means you have to be able to just trust that you're going to get to the end, that you're going to work it all out. So I freak out, and then I get another burst towards the end where I think, aha, this is what's going to happen. And I rush towards the end, so much so that my publisher quite often has said to me, did you just get to 110,000 words and think you should stop now? And I said, yes, I did. But the toughest thing for me, and I don't know whether it's, because it's a creative endeavor, is giving it away at the end, not so much to my wife who reads it first or my mum or my mother-in-law, but to send it to the publisher. I have this fear that it's not going to be good enough or that it might be rejected. So this is a kind of I guess all creative endeavors, you do it hopefully because you love it, and I write because I love it. But at some point you've got to put it out there, and that's when I'm probably at my most insecure. So that's probably my least favorite bit.
Okay. This question's probably too broad, from Glenda Warburton, but she says, what drives you? She talks about conservation in your books, but what is it that gets you out of bed and puts you in front of the wood processor?
Yeah, look, I'm looking out here at my window in Sarby Park near the Sarby Sands. I just had a monkey on my veranda. And the day before yesterday, there was a hyena walking around my house. And the night before that, there was a leopard. That keeps me excited, to live here, knowing that I've got to be a bit careful, I can't go walking around at night. It's not like Sydney, I might get eaten by a leopard or a hyena out there. There's a bit of an edge here, which keeps the heart rate up sometimes, keeps me excited. That's the wildlife side of things. I've become passionate about conservation. Like I said, I grew up in the suburbs in Sydney. I didn't even know anything about the Australian bush, apart from what I saw with the army, and I hated that, But so I've become more aware, more passionate about conservation. But what keeps me coming back here and keeps me out of bed, without sounding too glib, I think people like yourselves, if I'm writing to entertain people, and they're from a country that I'm not from originally, and they like what I'm writing, that keeps me going, and that leads to really finding a home here in South Africa and being welcomed by so many people from so many different parts of this wonderfully diverse country. That keeps me going, keeps me excited.
Okay, this is the last question, but it's not actually a question; it's an offer, and it's again from Yasmita. She says that if you start writing kids' books, can she volunteer her son as market liaison? He's 11 years old and eats books.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Absolutely, that's my phone going. Absolutely. Thank you very much for the offer. I think that would be great, because I'm going to need some, what do they call them, beta readers or whatever, to tell me if I'm getting it right. So I don't have kids of my own, but yeah, that's lovely. And that's what I would probably look to do, is to try and find a couple of people whose children might be interested in reading them, just to see. I've got a friend in Joburg. She and her husband are good friends of ours, and they've helped me with my research. And their two kids are junior honorary rangers, and I always thought that's like a pretty good idea for a book. So they might be able to get up to some adventures.
There are other questions coming in, but I'm going to have to hold it there, because I think there's a competition where people can answer the question. I think that's popped up on the people's screens. I'm not sure where we go to from here, whether we just wrap it up, or somebody from Macmillan pops in and says, "You've got a book." Let's pause and see what happens from Macmillan. Otherwise, we will wrap this up.
Hello from Macmillan. Our lucky winners are Louise Swimmer and Janet Jarvis. And I'm Eileen, and I will email you later today to find out about getting a copy to you. And thank you so much, everyone, for doing the poll. It's my first time, and I was really excited.
Fantastic. Okay, I think.
Can I just jump in there, Don?
Tony. Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't want to preempt you. I just want to say a quick thank you. If people do have other questions for me, please reach out to me on social media at Tony Park on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. And let's keep the conversation going, particularly about some of those things we've touched on. Thank you.
Tony, well, thank you so much for talking to us. Good luck with Blood Trail. I mean, I hardly have to say good luck. It's top seller in South Africa today. So, best of luck for the next 3, which you've probably largely written already. So thank you so much, and all the best.
Thanks very much, Don. Thanks to you. Thanks to Pam Macmillan, and thanks to everybody who's come along.
Okay, thank you. Farewell.